Hi friends, how are you? Today we are going to chat about my feature screenplay writing process. And I was going to do this video tomorrow, but I'm so alert and awake right now, and it's 7 o'clock in the evening. I'm very excited. I'm thinking about the topic that I want to share with you about writing. The thoughts are racing in my mind, so I decided to, why not just record a video right now at the nighttime. So I've been giving you a sneak peek here and there during my vlog about my writing process, but I never made a video dedicated on this topic. I really enjoy my writing process. Sometimes I might stuck on certain questions or ideas, but since I know what my purpose is and what I'm doing, I have been able to write every single day without really feel any kind of feeling of dreadful. I think knowing the process kind of helped with the procrastination or so-called writer blocks for me as well. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through the process and then the reason behind it. I'm also going to show you a little bit what's in my notebook about the project that I'm working on currently. I might blur out a lot of stuff in the notebook because it's still a working in progress. But I will try to leave the title sections that I'm working on and then explain to you, so in that way it will make sense to you. And yeah, let's start this video. And I have another cup of tea, but this time it's just rose and chamomile. I've been doing this thing of tea tasting from Bird and Blend, and then I bought 30 different kind of tea, one per bag, to kind of trying out. I write the tea tasting notes in my Evernote, so in that way I know which one I like the most, and then I can purchase it in bulk. I really want to get some cozy non-caffeinated tea, and then today it's a raining day and we are talking about writing, so you kind of have to have a cup of hot tea, right? If you want to, you can pause the video and go grab your tea as well. Okay. And by the way, my table is a mess today, but I did get a lot of work done. So before I go into detail about my writing process, I want to demystify something about writing first, and that links to why I'm having my current writing process. So if you're a writer, especially if you're a novel or fiction writer, you probably know this month is the month of NaNoWriMo. So if you don't know yet, NaNoWriMo is a national novel writing month that all the writers go on NaNoWriMo website and then they set up goals. So for the entire November, they're trying to hit X amount of a word count every single day. So I've been using the same method for screenplay writing, like doing X amount every single day. Instead of counting the word count, I was doing page count, because a feature screenplay usually around 90 pages. So if you write 3 to 4 pages only each day, then you will have a feature screenplay by the end of the month after 30 days. So that sounds really intriguing, right? But this process that I'm about to share with you, it's the reason I'm not doing NaNoWriMo this year. It's just not a good timing for me that I'm working on the analysis of my screenplay instead of actually sit down writing the story. So the thing I want to demystify about writing is somehow, for some reason, at least I was like that, have this idea of when you're making progress in writing, you have to make a physical progress. You can have page count, you can have word count. Like each day you have to move forward somewhere, you have to produce something, and then you call that as a writing. At least that's what I used to do, and that's when I hit the writer's block. That's when I feel I wasn't able to move forward the way it's supposed to be. And after several years of writing and understand more about writing and this entire process, what I learned is that writing is not just physically on a page that you're moving forward and making progress. Writing is much more complicated than that, and it's much more fun than that. So today that's what I'm gonna share with you, why and how I make my writing process so fun for me and feel very motivated every single day. So I split my writing process into 4 different stages. So the stages that I would use tools like NaNoWriMo or page count, word count to hold myself accountable are the first draft and after the story is fully developed, which means usually to me is the second draft. But there is a long process in between. Let me explain. So stage 1, I call it vomit stage. So usually it's because I have an idea kind of circling around in my mind for a long period of time. Typically it's because of a character that's very interesting instead of an actual plot. Something about the character I feel is something very relatable that I could develop, and I might know here and there some scenes and the story where it will go, but I don't really completely know the entire thing yet. So this is just a first draft. I have these small pieces of might be very vague, very on the surface, sometimes might be cliche stuff that's going on around this interesting character. So I would just sit down, start writing down the entire story that's in my mind. And then that's when I would use NaNoWriMo or doing a page count or word count throughout the month to hold myself accountable. And I think one thing very important during this stage 1 is to do it as fast as much as you can. It's like big vomit that you get every single thing that's related to the story out onto the page, even though it's bad. Usually in those drafts there's so many like meaningless things or dialogues. It doesn't matter. It's the process of dumping stuff out onto the page. After this process, I would set the screenplay aside for an extensive period of time, because during this 30 days of writing you kind of stuck in a story world. Even it's not very cohesive, it's not good, but a lot of idea kind of fixed in your mind. It's really hard to have fresh perspective if you want to go back to rewrite the story. So usually I would set it aside, maybe working on something else, and a couple months later I would come back and I would use a red pen and read the entire screenplay again. That's when I read a screenplay from very critical perspective, and also from a perspective of this is a work that someone give it to me and tell me, hey, I have this thing, fix it. And I'm a writer that I'm going to take this thing, this first draft, this very bad story, and see what I can do with it. So this is the way I use to defeating my problem and a lot of writers' problem of facing the blank page. I think the very difficult thing on anything you do is to start from scratch. In this way, in a sense, I don't really have any blank page. When I really start developing the story, I already have the past Nani written the story for me already, and that I'm someone who isn't the past Nani anymore, and then went in there to help her work on this story. I hope that makes sense. And then during this process, you will read a lot of stuff that you will think this is really, really bad, and you will have very clear ideas that this doesn't work. You're going to completely change or delete it. But what's interesting is you're also going to recognize a lot of stuff that's actually really good. Maybe not polished yet, but it's very personal, very relatable, or it kind of evokes certain emotions. And those are the things I use my red pen, put a star around it, circling around it. And those are the thing I will start developing the entire story from. Those are the thing that when you're reading the script, when you feel a little emotional and get a little bit goosebump. And they are the things that offer you a lot to work with. Once I read the entire script, I have more understanding or knowing what kind of character is in there, who is necessary, who can be deleted from story. But most important, I know my leading character and antagonist. And that's when I use a screenwriting book to guide me to analyze all the things in the story and to break them down, to go into the detail to develop them. And this is the second stage, the development stage. And then this is the thing that takes the longest time for me during my entire writing process. I've been mentioned many times in my channel that I'm using John Truby's Anatomy of a Story as my guide. Basically, he has a very interesting way of analyzing and developing story. Each chapter, there's one thing to focus on, and then he gives you example of some popular movies or novels. In that way, you kind of get a sense of what you're looking for your own story. So I went through chapter by chapter as a guide to guide me to think about my story. And there's a lot of really good screenwriting or fiction writing coach out there, and then they've written really good instructions and books. I don't think you have to fix on this one book that I just mentioned, but there are a lot of other ones. Keep in mind, I feel books like Save the Cat doesn't really count into this category. That's more of a book to help you structure the story for the plot, but not for the story development. So for example, when I'm going through John Truby's book, I'm going there to analyze what's the premise of my story, not just the log line, but also the premise itself. What's the design principle? What makes the story unique? I would go into detail to develop every single character in the story, even the sub-characters, the sub-story characters, to make sure I understand all their goals, needs, wants, desires, what their psychological problem is, what their moral issue is, and what they stand for in terms of the theme for the story. I want to make sure every single person appears in the story serve its purpose, not just some random people to fill in the plot. To make it clear, this is not a process to go in there to figure out what's the character's background story, what's the stories of the character that's outside of my screenplay. You know, like their upbringing stuff, but what very important to me is their needs and desire, and if they are coherent with other characters. After that, I would go into develop the story world and all the symbols to make sure they are also reflecting on the theme. It's almost like you building this entire world in a way that everything is pointing to the same direction for the audience in a very subtle way. Every character is a version of the same theme. I think I did a pretty good job on my first feature screenplay, and if you're interested, you can watch my movie in the link down below if you're in the US. And if you've seen my movie, you can leave a comment down below to let me know if you think all the characters, including the supporting roles, kind of fits into the story theme. I wonder if you can tell. Since I already have the film already, why can't we just use it as a tool to learn about what I've done, to learn from my mistake, right? And then go back to the topic. Here is the notebook that I use for this entire story breakdown analysis development stage. I use one single notebook for one project only. I will carry this notebook till the end, even during making the movie in post-production, if I'm the one who end up directing the story. This notebook will contain all the thoughts that I have from the beginning to the end of the writing process. In this notebook, it contains things I mentioned before, from premise, characters, to theme, story world, symbols, to plots, will all contain in this notebook. But it also contains questions that are popping up in my mind that maybe I want to be answered later, or research that I did something very interesting that I feel I can kind of wave into the story, or some things just randomly pop in my mind during this developing process that I just jot down on the right side column. I have my mark for different type of things. If I put asterisk, usually that's kind of imagery or a scene that it popped in my mind that I want to write it down as a reminder. And I use music notes for lyrics or song titles that pop in my mind because I'm working on musical currently, and I will block out things coming out from doing research on certain subjects, and those are the things I keep in the notebook on the corner or on the right side, so in that way I will not lose them. And this is a process I feel I really like what David Lynch described as a catching fish kind of process. It's like you catching the ideas. Ideas come by very fast. If you don't write it down, you will lose it most of the time. So if I'm working on developing certain things and then something suddenly pop, I will immediately write it down right next to it and then circling it with my marks for different kind of things. I hope that makes sense. Those things we're writing down into the notebook doesn't necessarily mean it will 100% make into the movie itself, the screenplay itself. Those are just things we don't want to forget. It's like a scrapbook that we want to keep everything in there, and they can be bad. Also, it's just maybe it's a very interesting idea, but it's not fully developed. It's kind of lame or cliche, but you think it might work with the story. You can also write it down to save it for later to think about it during the plotting process or something like that. And another thing is, I mentioned I use John Truby's book as a guide to walk through sections by sections. It doesn't mean that I won't move on until I figure out this section. What I do, and if you look into my notebook, you will see that I've written the design principle of the story for many times. I've written in the chapter when I'm supposed to work on design principle. I've written it again when I'm working on character, and I've written it again when I'm working on the story word. So it's a process of constantly rewriting what you worked on. And also sometimes when I couldn't find an answer for certain questions that I have, I would write down all the possibilities that I might have in my mind so I can see them on the page. And in that way, it's much easier for me to identify which one is closer to the answer. And sometimes I might even not figuring certain parts of it out yet, but I really feel like kind of sort of stuck, and then that's a sign to move on. So I usually just put a question mark, or I would write things like this to come back after I finish the next chapter to figure this out. It doesn't worth it to stuck in certain place. Oftentimes when you moving forward, working on something further, something else, and that will give you a spark of inspiration about a previous problem that you have. It's almost like this entire process is piecing the puzzle. You know how when you piecing the puzzle, you feel like you have to find this piece and put right there, but you couldn't find them. And what you will do is you move on to do other pieces. And once they all come together, somehow the more complete image will show you what that piece is. This notebook is a collection of the puzzle pieces. During this process, you collecting thoughts, you collecting ideas relate to this story, and then you put them all into this notebook as a box that you keep puzzle pieces. And then the plotting, second draft rewriting process is the process of really figuring out where exactly you're going to put them to make the entire story structurally works. Also, this is a great way to keep a track of records of all the things that you've thought about, you worked on. So you might regret for some newer version of more, for example, a character's need that you wrote. And then later you might want to go back to maybe the very first version of it, and then you already have it written in your notebook, and that's what you can work with. So this is like writing many drafts of the screenplay without really writing the screenplay itself. Once I feel I have all aspects of the story that's kind of developed, analyzed, and then they are very cohesive towards the theme, and then that's when I start working on the plot. I will also do it with John Truby's book with the plot chapter to make sure the whole thing flows well structurally. And after that, I will write a scene list. And then that will be a very comprehensive list of everything's gonna happen in the story. And then that's kind of like an organizing process for me. It's almost like I have all those notes jotted down, all those pieces about this story. That's when I went in there to organize them in an order that makes sense for the audience, and then that can create an emotional experience for the audience. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's not 100% every single scene. It's more of like I feel 70% of stuff is there, and I still want to leave a little room for something come up during the second draft writing process. Because a lot of time when you start writing, the character kind of starts speaking for themselves, kind of develop things for you. So you want to be a little bit open about that as well. Once all of this analyzation is done, it will be my third process, which is the second draft. And then that's when I can use things like NaNoWriMo or word count, page count to hold myself accountable again, to make sure that I'm physically on the page moving forward, making progress. And then the last stage will be the rewriting stage, not the second draft, but the third, fourth, fifth to the 100th drafts, how many ever you need to write. And then usually when I'm working on this stage, I'm working on not only structurally trying to fix certain things in the story, but maybe certain things doesn't work really well, and then trying to figure out a way to make it fit into story, or completely delete it, or rewriting something completely different. And then one thing very important during this stage, and it's also very helpful for me in terms of directing the story, is that I would went into every single scene to kind of ask myself the question of what is the purpose of this scene? Is it serving certain purpose towards the theme, or helping developing the story? And most importantly, I would go in there to figure out what each character wants in the scene, what they want to get out of the scene, what they're fighting for. Are the scene clear? Is there anything in the scene that I can represent visually instead of let the character say it out loud? Things like that. That's the things I'm kind of trying to rewrite. And also another very important thing is I would go in to see if there are scenes are serving exact the same purpose of certain previous scenes, kind of repeating a same beat and the story kind of stuck and not moving forward. And that's probably sometimes to either tweaking the scene to make it come out in a different way, kind of moving forward, making the story progress a little bit, or completely deleting the scene. And that's my fourth stage of rewriting. So here you go. This is my feature or fiction writing process. And again, you don't have to refer to John Truby's book that I'm using. You can use any book or no book at all to go the way you want. My point is that writing is not just the word count and the making progress on the page. Writing is also thinking. It's the process of learning about the story, about the characters. And then most importantly, it's a process of catching ideas and organizing these ideas, and then eventually presenting those ideas in a very unified way, in a form of your choice, no matter it's fiction, novel, screenplay, or even a poetry or some lyrics. Any kind of form that of your choice. Writing is all about catching and organizing ideas. When you see it that way, and then that's when you stop being so focused on being perfect and write something perfect, and that's when the procrastination and the writer's block stops, and then you really truly start enjoying the writing and the creating catching idea process. And I hope this video is helpful for you. I know every writer have their own writing process and what works for them. So please feel free to leave a comment down below to share with us what works for you and what your process is like, so we can learn from each other and then start a conversation. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. And if you are interested in watching my daily writing vlog, you can click this video right here. And then remember, be patient, be present, stay creative, and happy writing. I'll see you next week. Bye.